How is everybody?
Yeah. I got the recording started. Yay.
So we are recording.
Yes. Now we don't have a limit. Last week we had a 40-minute limit. It's
Oh,
unlimited. It's unlimited right now. So
okay.
I went
Sounds
ahead and
good.
sprung
We
to
can
the
talk a lot.
So pure potential.
yeah.
So, hello, Jeff.
Hello there.
Hello, Teddy.
All right.
So, what did you think about last week?
Of the week in general here
Oh,
in the United States.
the last week when we had a conversation.
Yes, I thought it was great. Yeah. It's great. I think it's great to have people. You actually see somebody. You can
Yeah,
actually wrap your head around a person instead of just typing messages.
yeah,
hmm I
yeah.
wasn't able to attend last week, but I watched the recording, and it was just lovely to see the conversation, hear the conversation, and just kind of get a sense of the people behind the comments and the pictures. So yeah, it adds bandwidth to this whole community.
Yes.
I was a bit nervous because you don't know how it's going, huh? Yeah, so you don't know the people, and you don't know what is the first time, and yeah, it's over the whole world, and everybody has different knowledge and things like that. So,
Well,
Jet, how is coming?
I'm sorry?
There's another one is coming. The
Yes.
one of last week.
oh yeah.
Jet, yeah, there he is.
Oh, you're
There we
back.
go. Thank you. Getting ready for another storm.
We got hammered last night. I woke up and everything's white.
Yeah.
Pouring down rain, and now it's covered all. I got to go out and shovel the walk and everything.
Yeah, we're back to rain here. We had a brief glimpse of winter, but unfortunately it's departed again. And I know that sounds weird, but I grew up in the prairie, so I actually like to have a bit of winter.
Yeah.
Where are you from, Jeff?
I'm calling today from Vancouver, so
Okay,
we're in a bit of a rainforest with kind of on the ocean and mountains. So in the winter we're greener than we are in the summer.
so it's still for Canada
Mhm.
now.
I wouldn't want to swim in the ocean right now, though some people do. It's rather cold, but still, it's uh,
Yeah,
not so much snow here too often.
okay.
That's one thing I learned
And
when, when I
where
was in
Jen,
Alaska.
it's a lot
Yeah.
of snow, huh? Sorry.
No, I was going to say one thing I learned when I was in Alaska a few years ago. Alaska's actually got a rainforest.
Yeah.
You think it has to be tropical for a rainforest, but nope.
Yeah, and the rainforests up here are quite beautiful all through the year. They're perpetually green, and it's a very different feel than a more tropical forest, but it's still very fecund and just teeming with all kinds of stuff. If you stand still for too long, moss starts to grow on you.
Okay, now I think I don't know if we're probably going to get some. There's been like three people who said I'm definitely going to come. Maybe they're still going to
Okay.
file in here. So, and I think the last time we talked about introduced each other's photography, and of course, I think Jeff, you saw that, so you heard our introduction. So, how about you?
Okay, let's see. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I've been taking photographs for most of my life. When I was quite young and starting in high school, I was in the photography club and I learned how to do stuff with a dark room and shooting on a K1000 with pushing high ISO film and stuff like that. So I had all of those kinds of experiences, and then throughout the years, I've always had a camera with me shooting different kinds of things. And, I think that it's really over the last maybe 15 years or so that I've gotten, it's a dominant hobby. I describe myself as an enthusiast, a hobbyist, an amateur. But I aspire to be, and I'm motivated just to kind of capture the things that I see. And so, I pursue different lines of this according to opportunity. I do a lot of kind of street and urban photography, as I've shared with the group a fair bit. I sometimes have dabbled a little bit with birds in flight and things like that, and kind of played the game of realizing that you really need some good gear to really get into it, or else you're finding that all along the way. And increasingly, I guess I'm trying to hone in on aspects of the things that really kind of motivate me to shoot more. So I try to go out and shoot every day. Vancouver is a very rich place to find visually fascinating things to shoot, so I don't struggle in that respect. There's lots of different things I can dwell upon, but I kind of I move across a lot of different genres, I suppose. And there are times when I guess I'm really just interested in exploring ways to visualize the world in ways that kind of intrigue me. There are times I get more into documentary. I'm thinking of the categories that were put up for different kinds of photography, and I like the more artistic side of things in some respects, because sometimes that's what I'm trying to do when I'm working with really narrow depths of field and trying to isolate things from the rest, because I like to get at the details of things. But at other times, it's very alluring to think about the storytelling you can do. If you go to a wide aperture lens and you're walking through a busy, crowded scene, and those kinds of opportunities, having the eye to see them is something that I like to try to develop. And I've been really interested in kind of seeing both the range of contributions to this community, and the fact that it's such a long-standing community, and then the conversations that follow. I've been, I think, posting now to Weekly for just over a year, and I've tried to be quite regular. And again, I've found that being in this conversation with all of you has kind of helped me to pay attention to things, even to the point where I'm out walking along and I'm thinking, was that one that I might possibly submit? Is that one that's kind of worthy of kind of moving forward? And that kind of decision every week is always an interesting one for me. So I like the presence of a friendly, critical group of folks who are kind of keeping me a little bit more on my visual toes. I think that's a bit of a mixed metaphor, but it's nice to be kind of paying attention to that. But yeah, I guess I'm a very I shoot everything I can. I play around with different cameras, different lenses, and I'm just motivated to shoot more. And being in these conversations with this group is I think feeding into that even more. So thank you for being so welcoming over the past year.
Well, great. Yeah. I think it's a great group. Like I've said before, I've been in other photography groups, and they're real people here. The other ones don't seem to be that real. At least nobody was willing to engage with one another as much as you see that on Flickr. Now, some of the Facebook groups, for instance, are kind of like that, but they're just too messy, I think.
Mhm.
In this group, you learn more about your mistakes. Sometimes you have 10 answers, and then 8 are good and 2 are bad. But of the 2 bads, you learn the most.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I try to put something up more like, I kind of like this, but I'm not really sure. So I'll throw it up there because some of them I'm pretty sure. I mean, I got I think some of my flower photos, like sure, people are really gonna love that, but don't want to deliberately cram that stuff down people's throats. I want to learn something more about what I put up there.
Yeah. It's not about the faves, and it's not about the free flights. It's about learning.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting for me because for the first couple months when I was posting, I was pretty nervous. The first time I didn't know what to expect, and I got some pretty strong critiques of something I put up that I liked, which was all fair. And what I think has become interesting is to kind of recognize the value of the conversation. At first, I kind of treated it like I had to post something and then just let it play out, let people say what they would say, and not be part of that conversation. But then I started to see how people were engaging through the week, and that always led to a little bit more kind of I don't know, you could explore the critique a little bit as opposed to saying, well, you didn't like it, well, that's that. So it's been interesting to see how over time I think it's not just an adjudicated conversation, like you post something and you see the result at the end, but the interaction along the way. And some of the most interesting weeks have been ones where there's been a to and fro, where, people are asking, well, why, how, or, what on earth have you done here? And, trying to actually get into the conversation rather than just kind of wait
But
to see what's going
in the group of Flickr, you don't have too much conversation, I think.
on.
This is a little negative thing of the group, uh, in my opinion. In other groups, you can say, well, you say this, but I think this. Did you think of that? And then you have a conversation. This is one more a judge.
Mhm.
You say you like it or not, and you say why, but then you don't have feedback afterwards.
Yeah.
Well, one problem you have with any group when you're typing stuff in, I mean, nobody here, at least a lot of people don't have that great grammar. And when they type something out, it might come off as too abrupt or even, aggressive when that's not what their intention was. Because
Oh,
most people don't really know how to type out phrases and craft those things that well, as opposed to most people are able to talk to one another like we are right now. So I think it's important for people to keep, apply a grain of salt to this stuff because maybe the people aren't giving them, uh, supplying their best, the mood that they want to imply.
Well, and it is, I mean, it is a multilingual group, and
Yes.
so I think, that's a factor. And then the
yeah,
fact
that
that
makes it difficult as well.
we're responding to very subjective things, and so you put something forward, you say, well, this is such a lovely image that I'm very proud of, and then someone says, well, I don't like this part of it, and negotiating those kind of differences work out better if there's a little bit, there's something that follows. So again, I've really enjoyed how a lot of folks in this community seem to be able to provide a critique and then provide some constructive feedback to push someone. So I've been pushed on a number of different areas that I have found very productive, and those are always the best moments. But it is, I mean, it's a tribute to the fact that there is that openness with a lot of folks here that happens. And then the other thing it took me some time to figure out is there's actually a really rich resource of conversations that you have archived in the discussions. And so I had to kind of remember to keep looking up there to see, oh, someone actually put something in here this week. And you go to most Flickr groups, and the last time someone posted in the discussion was 5 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is a very different scene,
Yeah,
which is
I was searching for more groups as well as like this, but there are not on Flickr. There are not so much. Yeah, I think Gent, your sound is off.
There we go.
Now it's on. Maybe you didn't say anything, but it's off as well. It was off.
I'm
Well,
gonna,
I've been looking at a lot of different groups as well, and I haven't found anything quite as interesting as the conversations that I'm seeing here. I don't take a lot of photographs. I looked at my uh, Panasonic that I had from 10 years ago, and you may laugh, but the shutter count on it from 10 years was 7,000 photos, right? So I'm
Not so
I'm
much.
sure that's a slow afternoon for some of you guys, right?
Yeah, but sometimes you make two pictures good in a day, and sometimes 3 months nothing.
Yeah.
well,
No, I'm just here to watch and improve and challenge myself, and it's been very interesting in the group.
I'm a big proponent of practice. It's like a musical instrument. You need to play, you need to practice.
Yeah.
So if you really want to improve with photography, take pictures. The more pictures, the better.
The more pictures, the better you can become.
Yeah.
It has been interesting too to see, like, we initially I thought everything had to be kind of shot that week, so I was kind of
Oh,
keeping
yeah.
it at the front. But I like the fact that people have from time to time gone back into their archives and brought something forward, and it's been lovely to see that, because I think again people are both encouraged by what they are seeing and doing and reflective on what they previously have shot. And one thing I've started to do is go back to some old things and reprocess and redevelop them with maybe
That's
a different
almost,
sensibility.
yeah. But I am a member of a photo group as well, and then they have sometimes they have an item for the next month, And then people say, "Well, let me look in my archive." But that is not the the meaning of having next month have to do something. So
Yes, yes,
sometimes people always look in their archive, but then you don't learn too much. Huh? That's the negative thing of having an archive.
I'm also a member of the group Macro Mondays, where you have to take a picture during the week previous to when you post it,
Yeah.
which, generally I'm just too busy to do that. But I need to jump in and do that more often. I'm also a member of a group called the Icebox, which is a little bit more aggressive. People are sort of more like, they're going to be more, oh, this photo sucks or something like that. And but it's on a friendly basis. But I don't think that's the best way to do things. But it is kind of fun if you have
Yeah.
a thick skin.
But what you say, Jeff, is true as well. When you pick a photograph which is old and you remake it again, maybe when you have it on your screen, you say, "Well, this is what I'm going to do next week another time,"
hmm
because now I know more than 5 years ago.
yeah,
Or I think you developed your editing skills as well in these 5 years.
Yeah.
absolutely. And the tools themselves have evolved. I
Yeah.
mean, some of the if you reprocess an old raw file with the latest versions of the software now, you often get much superior results.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's always good to look back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, one
So
thing,
what is your, Teddy, what is your meaning of today? What are you going to do? We are discussing now just in general more
just
things, but
see where we're going for. I have an idea to maybe talk about a little bit. One of them is about what do people expect out of their photography being, because if you Google great or good photographs, like the best photographs of 2024, something like that, you can go through and take a look at these things, and those are pretty much what you would typically think of as photography, as you were at a photography show or something like that. But there are a lot of people who do things like more artistic stuff where you do manipulate the photo. You take a photo and you add things to it, which I think is equally valid as a form of artistry. But what are those? How are those people supposed to handle that? I mean, if you Google stuff, anybody think about photography, they're not talking about any of that usually. They're talking about depth of field, the rules of composition. You're talking about lenses and things like that. They're not really talking about what's happening after the fact to add things to the photograph. So I'm curious about how are these people supposed to deal with that? Are there groups that take care of that type of photography? I mean, I don't do that kind of photography myself, but I don't have the vocabulary or the knowledge to really judge that stuff fairly because I don't really know what to tell about them because I'm more of a technician, so I can't get into the technicals of something like that. So what would your thoughts be about that?
actually you say, well, how I can make more artistic photos?
Not just artistic, but people who start with a photograph and then add things to it. Like, for instance, there are a few people who apply a lot of over sharpening as an artistic effect,
Oh yeah, like that. Yeah, things like
or
that.
they'll make something make look like it was wrongly processed. Like they make it look like film because it's got scratches in it or faded out as parts of the image and things like that.
Yeah,
Or
I did something like that some months ago. I don't know if you won't remember the images, but I titled it "After the Highlights Are Blown." I had taken a couple shots of some poppies, and the highlights were long, long gone. And so I just cranked up the contrast and blasted them because visually it was interesting to me. So, there are times when, to your question, there are times when if I'm trying to if my intention is to try to document something, I'm usually trying to stay very true to what I saw. And I'm trying to have it kind of connect to the light. I remember the colors. I remember, things like that. So if I am looking at clarity or if I'm making adjustments, for instance, a long time ago, I was totally done with high dynamic range photography because it was also artificial looking. But then there's the odd photo where, well, that kind of looks cool, so that's okay. And so like to me, I think it comes back to that if someone has an intention to do something that's more abstract or an intention to do something that by a certain kind of over processing or over baking of something that matches the vision of what they want. And I think intentionality is the key thing for how I'm hoping to kind of bring more attention to the choices I make while developing. And the same kind of thing around, like I had some mentors here that I've worked with over the years who have really tried to kind of encourage intentionality. And I think that goes back to compositional choices as well. And you can sometimes kind of see people not pay much attention to framing or not pay much attention to exposure. And they may be striving for something, but they don't know how to achieve it until they begin to make the choice, for instance, to set the shutter speed at a certain way or to, well, right now I've been getting some help from folks about being square to buildings that I'm trying to take shots of so I don't get all this weird skewed distortion. So I guess the intentionality is the key thing for me. And then when you look at some of the genres of photography or some really famous people, there are lots of good models of people who do fantastic things that one can look at and kind of aspire in terms of the things that you go on to do. But in a similar way, there's always going to be someone who kind of breaks those conventions, who then also has a vision for what they're wanting to do. And, they start exclusively shooting with massive underexposure, or they want blur in their shot or some other thing. So I think if the person's choice is involved in the resulting image, whether or not I like the image, that's something to pay attention to.
Depends on the kind of photography you do as well, because
Mhm.
when you are always making abstract photos, then it's more easy to put things inside afterwards, I think. Or when you make photos of birds, yeah, what you can do, you can with the birds you can do as well things, but it is for me that's just maybe I do it one time and then not any longer. So uh, with sports, when you make photos of sports, you can do something as well. Then you do different things like others, different things than others, because yeah, sports is how you say it, more staccato. When you make a photo of football, I think when there are 50 photographers,
Mhm.
they more or less 40 do the same thing.
Yeah. And some of them would get fired if they did something different, and others will get lauded as artists if they do something different. So context matters a lot.
Yeah, but when you are different, they pick you up because you do something different. So it's good to be different.
It was kind of like the Hunter S. Thompson when he went, I think went through the Super Bowl
Yeah.
to report. Familiar with the art,
Yeah.
he was like gonzo journalism.
Gonzo tourism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just like totally off the wall kind of stuff. But he's an award-winning author. But if you tried to pull that off, if you're not him, you would just get laughed out of the business.
It worked for the Rolling Stone, but it wouldn't work
Yes,
for the
it did.
Washington Post.
But my main concern, not really a concern, but I wonder about the poor folks who invest a lot of time. Like we have a creative photography group, which I don't participate in because it requires a lot of like collaging. Like, okay, this December, they're all making, Christmas cards with snowflakes, pasted on top of things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you try to enter that into a photo contest, you're not going to get accepted. Like a jury, like what? But there ought to be a place for people like that to display their stuff and be rated or praised. Um, and I think there are people on Flickr that post. I'm not saying to that extreme where they're pasting snowflakes on top, but it doesn't look like it fits in with what you normally see in photography circles when they're actually talking about photography, as opposed to something like illustration or digital painting.
Mhm.
But everybody has a standard, and
Yeah.
if you are photographing, if is your hobby, then well, you look at the colors when you photograph something, and then when you edit, your editing process need a bit to be like the colors were when you took it. not too far away. You can do something by editing. For example, you maybe some blur inside, but not so far that you cannot see anymore what you were doing.
Yeah. Like when I
So that,
my goal is like if there's blur, I want it to be intentional, like I've used a low shutter speed or deliberate camera motion, and not adding blur as an effect in Photoshop. Um, but that's me. That's the way I like to do. I like to be true to what came in on my camera. And I'll often extend canvases. Like if I was a flower and it's a little bit off center, I'll extend the canvas a little bit and fill it. But it's although all that filled in area matches the rest of the background, for example.
but you talk about people who are going too far. So
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
uh,
Yeah, I would.
put too much blur inside, and then you see, well, this is blurred.
Yeah, and I would call that too far too. But those people, that's not too far. It's exactly what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And you
And it's
will not
always
see. They usually will never see examples of that in lists of good or great photos.
No.
Yeah. And it never takes long when when we talk about the process of photography and let's say the idea of capturing what's there. I mean, any time we use a camera to take a picture, we're already kind of rending it out of reality, and it's already artificial the moment we've
Yeah,
clicked the button. So this notion that photography is reproduction of the real is already a bit problematic, both because of the introduction of a shutter, the introduction of a sensor, and then all of the other choices we make along the
And
way.
for
And
example,
it's been that way since the beginning of photography. It's always been kind of a it's messing with reality. And then I think one of the wonderful things about photography is it's very like a lot of different art. I mean, it's highly subjective. There are lots of different genres. There are lots of different visions of what people are wanting to achieve, and it's all photography. And it's difficult. Like I think it's totally reasonable to say, all right, so we're in a group and we're talking about street photography, and in our conversation, street photography means these things. Do that, submit these. Currently within Weekly, we're generally, from my point of view, you're opening up to people submit something that you want critique. So it means that we see, like we have people who are wonderful abstract photographers. We've got really interesting street photographers. We've got people who are doing urban, street, macro, and other kinds of things. And all of those things have very different needs. So it's sometimes frustrating if you submit an abstract image that is, from your point of view, abstract, and someone says, "Well, I don't see the story here." Well, story might not
yeah.
have entered into that. So it's unavoidable that that will happen, but it's a very broad area that people can create something of, and it could be just a document of what they saw, or it could be an artistic expression of what they see.
yeah. I
And
think it's go ahead.
sometimes you go too far, but that is for you a line as well.
Hmm.
When other people say, "Well, this is the idea is good, but you are going too far here. The red is too red, or the blur is too much, or things like that."
Yeah.
Then you get a feeling of, well, maybe I have to go a lit to change a little, and then the next time I do it like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll first look at someone's photo, and I might think I know where they're going with this, and and here's something I'll try to give them some suggestions how to improve what they're doing. But every now and then, somebody will tell me, "No, that's exactly what I was trying to do, and you're telling me not to do that." Although most of the time, when I give people advice, I think I'm trying to help them because it looks like they're still learning things that I was fortunate enough to learn. Uh, but and I end up being too. I think I end up being lecturing too often with that kind of stuff because I'll sometimes have a really long, almost like a diatribe about something when I actually think the photo is very good. It's a keeper photo or maybe a keeper and I'll save it and everything else. But then next I've got two or three paragraphs about one little tiny item of the photo.
I have done a time moving with my camera, and then in another group I put some because I do when I do it for a long time. I don't stop. I don't do other things. I just do it for a couple of months. And in the other group, I always put some photos, and then some people say, "Well, there you have Jan again with his moved photos. I cannot see that blur anymore." And then I say, "Well, you have to handle it because I'm going on for 3 months more,
Yeah.
and then after 3 months we will see if I go more, do more, or not, or I stop it, or I go another path. But now, for now, you have to say what you think about it, and then, well, I'm happy that I've done it because I learned a lot.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes I appreciate when someone says, well, it's not my cup of tea, but, and then they just offer something, or
Yeah,
there are times when people abstain, but it's, again, I've really loved seeing like the shots that you've shown. Like, I don't know how you achieve some of those, the motion that you put into your photos, and I have yet to figure it out. And there have been times when I sit and stare and try to understand the process behind the image, and then we have people who are both using camera motion as well as multiple images
and there are
superimposed.
a lot of kinds. Huh? Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like trying, like it's really interesting to see the resulting image and then try to, okay, what's the recipe behind that, to kind of produce something like that. And one of the things I was thinking about my own goals this year is I probably do the majority of my manipulation in the camera where I'm playing around with aperture. I like depth of field as kind of, that's the thing I think of first. I don't usually touch my shutter speed very much at all, but I really should put in front of myself the challenge. Okay, just play around with shutter effects. Drag things out, freeze things, and things like that, because that's something I don't do enough of, just to kind of play in that space a little bit. But I've been loving to see the introduction of motion in the very
Yeah,
creative ways that I've seen it through your work and work of several other folks. It's really fun
yeah,
and visually striking.
yeah.
So bring it on. I don't mind seeing more of that from you.
Yeah.
No, but what they say, sometimes you go too far. You cannot see anything anymore.
Now that's
This,
that's where
this,
you do.
with colors is the same. Sometimes you go with colors. You think, well, that's red, but when afterwards you make it a bit more red, and then you go too far.
Yeah.
You put too much red in it, and then, well, with the feedback, you can go back to your picture again and look at it. If you agree, you go a little bit back, but if you not agree, you go where you want. Yeah.
Well, you throw it up there on Flickr and people criticize it, maybe you're going to get a good criticism, but then even if you don't give something, you still have more information to go on to take more photos like that. That doesn't mean you quit.
Mhm.
I was trying to find an example of it. There's one of the most beautiful photographs ever, I think, is a woman on fire on the Parthenon. It was, oh gosh, it was one of the, not Edward Weston. I'll find it later on. But anyway, it's it was taken back in there like 1920 or something. And there's a woman, I think it's Isadora Duncan's sister, on the steps of the Parthenon with the wind blowing her gown.
Mhm.
And she looks like she's on fire, but it's a slow shutter speed with the blur, and you can see the look on her expression, her face in the background. It's absolutely gorgeous. But that was the taken back before you had any photo manipulation at all. So he was able to use that slower shutter speed, which I like to think of, that's a way of capturing time. Time
Yeah.
is just another element we can explore. And it's a totally legitimate thing. Just because you motion blur is something that can be used as a tool like any other.
And not a lot of people use it. Not, most of the people they go order for ordinary pictures. Just
Yeah. There are quite a few people who specialize in that.
yeah,
Mhm. Like
Um,
the people who like eliminate crowds, like or
yeah.
blur turn crowds into a
I
flow of humanity.
one time I've ordered something of Eva Polak. I don't know if you know her, but she does only abstract photography and with animals and trees things like that from people, and she is more or less specialized in things like that.
Hmm.
And she had an something for a small PDF for $20. So I bought that, and I've done her exercises, so I
Oh,
know a little bit how
you
this
should
works now.
share that in the chat. I'd be interested in that
Yeah.
resource. There's a really funny discussion forum I can't remember how long ago in Weekly some months or years ago. I think it was years ago where people submitted like famous photographs from past photographers, like really famous ones,
Yeah,
and they had discussion like, so would this be a free flight or a keeper?
Yeah.
And the discussion of that was actually quite amusing because it kind of raised to the question like,
yeah.
how is it that we respond to
Well,
photographs of
start
iconography?
again. Start
Yeah.
again. Just put one photo inside and then see what happens.
But another topic too, with that, when you mentioned something about what's the story behind a photo, and I would say that's like what you would call narrative in a photo. And some photos, like if you're taking a photograph of somebody with a lightning bolt, what's the narrative there? And when I take one of my bees hovering over something, what's the narrative there? But then you also have something where it tells a story, especially if it's in street photography, something. So where does narrative no longer apply? It's the same with abstract photos. Usually there's no real narrative, but we still find it beautiful.
Mm.
Or some people will often ask, what is this photograph supposed to be about? And sometimes it needs to be that way. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. But it's easier when you have a photo, huh? Then you can talk about it.
Yeah, good idea. And I wasn't even thinking about.
But when you have a photo, you can say, well, this is the narrative or not. But it's not the other way around. It's not so easy to tell what you need to be put in to have a narrative.
Yeah,
I think it's like we strive to find coherence in what we look at. So it's possible that someone who's taken a picture can be successful in conveying the story they were telling, but it's equally plausible that someone looking at an image will find a story there that the artist hadn't originally intended.
Yeah,
But,
or
but we
the
do
week.
seek meaning, we do seek closure when we see an image, and we had that really interesting picture this week with the doll in the corner with I can't remember who posted that.
yeah.
And again, trying to figure out like what's going on here. And it's dreamy, it's mysterious, it's a little bit distorted, and that in itself kind of puts elements in play that I can make meaning out of. So I don't think it's complete when someone has taken that picture or posted it. The storytelling isn't done until I look at it, and then I start to make some sense out of it. And then just people make different sense out of the things they see. And that's the subjective side of things. I might look at something, there's a story there, but I don't see it or I don't like it, and I'm not
Uh,
open to putting the work in to make a story out
It's
of it.
true, because some people say sometimes it's not strong enough. The story is not strong enough. But what it has to have a strong story.
Hmm.
Uh, that's for one man will say, well, this is not a strong story enough, but another will say it's strong enough, and I can see the meaning of this photo, but others cannot. That is somewhere in the middle between free flight and and a keeper.
Well, oftentimes the best thing about something is not so much because you have a deliberate story intended by the photographer, and maybe the photographer did, but if it's mysterious enough for the reader or the viewer to build their own story around it, I would say that's particularly important with movies like two, Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's often argued about what's the meaning of this story, but that's not a deliberate attempt. There's not supposed to be a story. Or if you have like David Lynch films, for example, how do you interpret that? Or and then if you're from Canada, I don't know if you're familiar with a director named Guy Madden. Anyway, his stuff is really bizarre if you try to read it, but you have to fill in the gaps. and the gaps that are filled by you are like super interesting.
Yeah, but sometimes as well, you make a photo, for example, in the street, and then you have not too much moments, but sometimes you have a moment. Well, this is it. This is the story. But a lot of times you have something what's average, what is not enough, what is you are searching uh, for the meaning of the photo. Then you put it in Flickr or somewhere else, and others tell you what you are missing or what what you have to do next time, or maybe when you go a little bit more under or up or down, or then you had the story was better.
Mm. I'm sure we've all had those moments where we take a picture and then when we look at it, we realize we had no idea that we caught something that we caught. A few years ago, I was in Mumbai, India, and shot after shot, I was taking a picture of this one thing here, and there were 32 other really interesting things happening in that photo all at the same time that were just layered in. And I had no idea in taking the shot that they were there, but boom, there they were. So there's that serendipity sometimes that you capture more than you saw, which can also be fun. Luck is involved too, I think, in some of those kinds of shots.
And I want to try to share, by the way, since I upgraded to this pro account, I'm not finding the share button.
Should be down at the bottom of your
Everybody
screen.
has that, I think.
Yeah. Oh, there it is. Okay. There it was covered up with another thing. Okay, here's the Edward Sticken photograph. I can
There's something coming. Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, very nice.
That's just all with the shutter speed?
Yeah, this was taken like in the early 20s. I mean, you didn't have any other way to create something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have painted over that, but that's not his style at all. But I think it's quite a beautiful photograph, and you're using, you know, motion.
Yeah. In camera.
Yes.
Looks like a fire, huh?
Yeah. And the name is Woman on Fire. Yeah, Woman on Fire.
So actually the sun is behind there, I think. Eh?
Hard to tell because of well, possibly like the highlights on the fabric almost look, well, yeah, I just don't know. The emulsion on that is really interesting too, with all the texture it adds.
Yeah. I believe he was using a 5x7 or 8x10 view camera.
So that would have been a long exposure.
Yeah.
So she stands still.
Yeah, that'd be a hard pose to hold.
With the wind, yeah. I think she's a dancer, so she was probably posing, and moving around while she was at the steps of the Parthenon.
Yeah. And it was a long exposure. You don't know how many seconds, I think, but
Yeah. Which you could.
so she was standing still, maybe. Yeah. I was thinking, maybe she held something that's not. Maybe she's leaning her back to something that she can stand still.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. So another thing ski, which unfortunately he can't do weekends. So I'm going to try to figure out a way for us to have a weekday meeting so he can attend, and of course other people that maybe can't do weekends. But he posted something recently about what is your photography? What is it that you do specifically? We've already touched base on that somewhat, talking about some of the things we did today. But are you familiar with what he asked about?
And he said between classical, and he offered a definition,
Yeah.
and then artistic, and he offered a definition.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say about that? It's particular, people asking what's your story kind of thing.
What's my story? Oh, I don't understand exactly what you mean.
In
Can
his,
you?
let me get it up here and I'll see if I can.
Here, I'll put it in the chat. I'll put the way he framed it in the chat. Oh, it's too long. Hold on. There's a definition. Oh, it's still too long. Okay, I'll just do the first one.
Where does your photography fall?
That was his first category. And then here's the second category. Uh, and the questions.
Now, I personally, I sort of a student of the history of photography and his idea of classical photography. I see where he's going with that, but that's a convoluted story because when you go into it came from uh, Neefs with his first photograph ever uh, to where you have people wanting to be more artistic. So there was always a constant struggle between people who are more technically oriented and those who are more artistically oriented. And classical photography, and I would argue classical photography is film, but I'm anal. So there's always a battle between that. And you had previously you had the concept of straight or pure photography with people like the F64 group in the West Coast with Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, people like that. And then you have more pictorialists like Edward Steichen with The Woman on Fire.
Yeah.
And I would say that his pictorial image is very, it's not anything weird. There's no weird processing.
No,
It was all what happened in the camera. And
out of the camera. Yeah.
yeah,
And then there's this in-between bit too, like Muybridge. And if you think about how camera actually reveals moments in time that you can't actually perceive,
Yeah.
and the play in those spaces that the technology reveals in a way that's different. So I mean, there's a lot at play. You know, we talked earlier about depth of field or using shutter speed to elongate or change the relationship of time. I mean, all of those things are happening with people who have scientific or technical or artistic intent.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like when I look at these two categories, I might aspire at times to be more technically precise, and you know, I hope I understand and gaining more understanding about exposure and things like that. But I probably am more inclined to. I'm happy to have things not look exactly how they should. You know, like I think of the bee shots that I do. I like it when I have the bee kind of flying over top of an impressionist painting with the colors. I don't want the flowers to be in full focus. I want there to be a blur. Hopefully not a motion blur, unless I want them. One of my favorite pictures of a bee I've ever taken. It's got all kinds of blur, but it also the blur suggests motion in a way that is pleasing to me visually. So, you know, I think that um, you can look at the classical photography or the artistic photography one, identify genres of how people are taking pictures within them, and then kind of think about like on a certain day, you may find yourself pulled one way or the other according to what's in front of you or what you set out to do. Some people, I think, have projects to do some version of these things, and that is where they might dwell for years. Other people will have within their repertoire the ability to go from one, you know, a more documentary style to a more artistic impressionist style, because they know their tools well. They have the vision to just kind of flip according to what's in front of them.
Yeah, I agree with you. So sometimes you are busy with technical things and you want to figure out everything of one particular uh, thing you are busy with, and next time you you go there more, you go with the same on the same place, and then you try to do more artistic things with that same place and that same thing you have in mind with your experience technical.
no,
So
yeah. Let me.
you go from one way to another sometimes.
When you mentioned about the bee with the flower uh, out of focus, which is what I do frequently. And one thing I discovered though is if you make a large print, like a 16 by 20 or larger, the area that's out of focus is much more noticeable.
Yes.
So, so
Sometimes not to good effect.
yeah, but sometimes it's also this. Oh, people go, "Wow!" Look, I mean, it's just almost like that's the subject is the autofocus. So I think if you're going to make a very large print, you're probably better off to crop in a little bit more so you don't have so much territory in the autofocus area. But when
Yeah.
you look at it on your screen, it looks absolutely perfect.
Yeah, but screen and print is different as well. Huh?
Yeah,
But people like Monet did pretty well with out of focus things, right? So I
yeah,
mean it again it depends on your vision. And the thing that I think becomes interesting in these kinds of definitions is it's useful if you have an idea that if I want to kind of do something that is more technical and I want to have motion frozen and I want to have depth of field, I should know how to do that and go after that. And in a similar way, if I want a different kind of field, I should be able to make the choices to create that.
Yeah, it is the best to know how it's technical working, and then when you know that, to make it the same picture, but then with everything blurred or out of focus, or so then you learn something, I think, because you know both sides, and then you can uh, put inside the more artistic in a more artistic way in your technical photo things that you have learned.
I think it's always really useful when people's repertoire is expanded by, when you look at a lot of people's photography, you gain, oh, I never knew I could do something like that, or you learn about different ways, and I think it's reasonable that a lot of folks who are interested in photography also do a fair bit of exploration of other visual arts or painting and graphic
Yeah.
design and other things, because
Yeah.
all of those techniques can feed into the development of our sensibility for capturing and organizing things in the constraints of whatever visual tool we're using.
I don't often go to a museum, but you can learn a lot of paintings as well. That's true.
and well, again, going back to printmaking and the concept of pixel peeping.
Mm.
Like frequently, how people will say, "Well, you're engaging in pixel peeping," and my first impulse is, "Well, why don't you just take better photographs?" And what I do, I never look past 100% view. However, when you make printmaking is usually very forgiving. So if you have certain artifacts that might be present on your screen when you make the print, they're gone. They just sort of meld into the background.
Everything is black. Yeah.
Yeah. But I would argue that there's no, and I think most of these artifacts that I'm talking about are totally avoidable.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of to me, that's kind of a lazy practice to say, oh, well, nobody's ever going to notice this on a print. In my opinion, you should work harder to make sure that stuff isn't there because it's just a good discipline. Otherwise, how far are you willing to let that slide? But
Yeah.
what would be your thoughts on that? Pixel
Well,
people.
it was useful. I think a critique that you fairly leveled at me early on was around the sharpening artifacts that were just there, and I could easily pull them out just with a bit of attention. And so once I started looking for it, I saw it, and I figured out, it's now one of the steps I take before I put a picture forward is I do a mask to reduce the sharpening to where I want it to be and not everywhere else. So that's just kind of your own fault. You're shooting yourself in the foot if you put something out with all of those artifacts. They don't need to be there. And especially because I like to shoot things with very narrow depths of field, those artifacts are never a positive addition. So like figuring out, like, sometimes paying attention to the details at the level of the pixel is useful. 100% definitely, 800% not so much.
No,
And some people kind of drill right down in there. But to understand what happens when you apply an unsharp mask, and you're actually not just creating a contrasting sharpness, you're also creating a new artifact that's artificial and will kind of make your whole picture harsher. So again, I think some of the pixel peeping is useful to. I sometimes catch myself going through a recipe of things I do, and I'm not looking at the image on the screen and its transformation enough. And I should be, because there are times when I apply something just automatically when in fact I don't even need to do that. So, paying attention to what happens when I change this setting is just a good instinct, even if it's something I typically am accustomed to doing. And then your question about, well, what happens when it's printed? I don't print nearly as much as I used to, though I do have a new printer here, so I'm going to do some more prints. And I know that that will require me to develop a, the pictures will need to be processed differently to look the way I want them to on print. And then the whole chemistry of the inks and the paper and resolution start to play into it in a way that's slightly different, actually a lot different than the screen, because it's reflective light, not illuminated light. That's
Right.
also part of how the image is made.
No, I don't know either. I don't print any long. No, the last 3 years I didn't print anything. So
I didn't either. And then I joined the photography club, and they have exhibits that you're required to have prints. And it was a great discipline. It's a great thing that it was fun.
I just printed this one that I posted to the group a couple of weeks back, and I
right.
have some work to do on my in printing it. I discovered I need to calibrate my screen and my printer so that
Yeah.
they are talking together a little bit more.
Yeah. I just got a spider thing. I still need to figure out how to do it right.
Yeah.
I have a Mac, so with a Mac you don't need a spider, I've heard.
You can still benefit from it. There are profiles in there, but you'll always benefit if you are confident that the color space of your printer and your screen are they can talk to one another.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. And as far as pixel peeping goes, when you go for your own purposes, if you're trying to retouch something, 400% is a good way to do it. If you're trying to get some little halo out of something or other, you can usually do an expert job if you could really zoom out. So you can make all these little minor changes that nobody will ever notice.
No, but I understand from you as well, because you have you gave me some critics sometimes as well about the artifacts that on the border of the contrasts you make what Jeff is telling as well, that you make artifacts by yourself, and that when you go too far and in the making contrasts, then you can see it.
Yeah.
But I didn't see it in the screen. But when somebody notice it, then you go to look at it and you make it bigger, and then you can see it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
actually, sometimes you're not aware, because when you put something on Facebook, nobody will tell you that you have done something wrong. But
Yeah. If your
when
friends
you're
and
in a
family
group
think
like
your stuff is
when you're
great.
in a group like Flickr, that's different, a different cookie. Huh?
Yeah.
But there's a really interesting kind of moment too right now with and it seems to be a bit of a research with a lot of folks who are interested in film photography with actual chemical processes a part of the mix as well as digitization that follows. We have people who are either happy about looking for or not wanting to at all film grain in their images, or they're using various formulas or settings from their camera or from their processing software to artificially put film grain in there. And the other piece of this pixel peeping is there are aesthetics that people are kind of moving towards. So you have hyper sharp, hyper detailed kind of stuff that sometimes works really great. Sometimes it feels a little bit sterile, and then stuff that is very gritty and grainy. And for some people, that's
Yeah,
not a good
this
thing to do.
question
But
from
it's
what
a lot
is
of
beautiful
latitude.
and what is not beautiful. And
Yeah,
so
very
some people
subjective.
say, well, some grain inside, that's beautiful. And other people say, I don't want grain inside because it's making bad.
Yeah,
Yeah. All noise is an artifact because your eyes don't have noise, So, but that's something we've learned to live with, because when you see a grainy photograph from the 1950s or something like that, that adds a charm to it.
yeah.
We're sort of used to experiencing that. And now, but you can do that by changing your ISO to do that without having to add noise yourself. Um, but
Sometimes I have photos in the street. I make, for example, in the shadow photos of people. And then there's sometimes a lot of contrast inside, so a lot of noise in the shadows as well.
Yeah.
yeah,
And then that is not too bad for my photos. I learned. So
Well, and in digital, it's better typically to underexpose than overexpose, and even more so if you're shooting monochrome, because it's really hard to recover highlights where there's tons of data still in the shadow. So, it does come back to technique a little bit too, at least in terms of like the differences between cameras. If you know your gear well, or you're paying attention, you can start to use exposure compensation, meter differently when you're in a complicated scene. I don't so much anymore, but use bracketing, other such techniques to help you with challenging things of that sort. But it is interesting that I think that the pixel peeping takes us down a certain road aesthetically that is both really beneficial but also artificial. If you're spending all your time looking at something at a screen, like I'm about almost a meter away from my screen, maybe just short of that, and I'm not looking at the pixel level. If I'm looking at stuff that I've printed on the wall, I'm usually even farther away. So my eyes will handle quite well the resolution at an appropriate space. You rarely are going up to a fine printed image with a magnifying glass and looking up close, unless you want to see brush strokes, let's say, on a painting.
Uh, you always
So,
have you always have to think what's going on, eh?
yeah.
What I'm looking at, or uh, what you want to see, and is it better than last thing that you've seen or not?
Mhm.
Last week I had seen a photo of a building, and it was the colors were too bad. So I was thinking, well, maybe I want to do that as well by myself because the colors were so bad, and maybe I can do it better by myself. So I I went to that place in the daytime because I wanted to make the photo for the in the evening. But in the daytime, I wanted to look first because then you can see how the light is, and can see what kind of place you want to stand and things like that. It was uh, in the upper side of a garage for cars. And then I went there, and I made the pictures Friday. But what I want to say that I made bracketing as well. I did the bracketing as well. And then afterwards, when I was home, seen the photos. It was a long exposure a long exposure. The best photo from the long exposure was 30 seconds, and I had two other photos with one of 15 and one of 8 seconds, and with the same diaphragma. But actually, I want to make that three. I wanted a HDR picture and the other and compare it with the other one, the best photo of it. And actually, my conclusion was that the best photo was not the HDR. It was the photo I have made just one time. So I do something wrong, or I don't understand it, or the colors are different, or but I have to find out what's going on. So maybe I go next time, another time to check because I've put the photo, and maybe you can. I put the photo in Flickr for next week, so you can see it. It's
Oh, yeah.
about
Very good.
the Morsport is a place where people were hanged when in the 1600 before 1600. Yes, in the year 1600.
Right.
Awesome. So, what I want to say that sometimes you go for a technique, but you don't understand the technique. And then what you do now is better than the technique that you don't understand.
Well, I'd like to say people like to say if you don't understand something, pretend you do. That's better than not doing anything at all.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, post that. Yeah, post that the next time.
Well, and it is fascinating. Like I like, sometimes people have prompted, go back and shoot that again, and going back and shooting things more than once kind of is really I shoot in my neighborhood for all, repeatedly all the time, and I have for 20 years in the same neighborhood. So, kind of seeing different places at different times a day encourages me to go out. One thing I was noticing on a picture I was processing the other day, I was playing around to adjust the white balance a bit, and I realized that I was undoing the fact that I had beautiful golden light coming into it, and I was rendering it all neutral. And and so like again, paying attention to like there are times when there are color casts and other things in the shot that actually are part of what is desirable of the shot, and not kind of getting into this sense that all pictures have to look in a way that is perfect as opposed to how they look, which might be part of the charm or part of the aesthetic or atmosphere of the shot.
Well, it
So
depends on what kind of photographer you are. If you are a
yeah,
wedding photographer, then everything need to be balanced, huh?
yeah,
Uh, because the white dresses needs to be white.
Yep.
yeah,
Black, the clothes of the men need to be black. But when you are a mood in the evening, photographing a mood in the evening at the beach, it's a different.
Oh yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, wedding photography, you have to be very precise. I mean, you get some of the romantic type shots or something like that, but generally you want everything to be sharp. There's some pretty adventurous wedding photographers out there, but still they'll have their main backbone of their catalog
yeah,
of wedding is going to be the sharp photographs.
yeah. And everything calibrated in terms of the
Yeah.
consistent color all the way through. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned, Jeff, you mentioned about the underexposing, which is that's one of the great things about digital. You can underexpose, and if in doubt, underexpose a little bit, especially if you're shooting into the sky or it's a backlit area, because you're not going to be able to recover the highlights, not nearly as much, but you can get a lot of shadow detail. That
Yeah.
wasn't true with film at all.
Yep.
Very little latitude to work with film, but then when you just have a solid black area in a negative or a solid white area in a negative, there's nothing there to pull out.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think also like again the technique I was taught a long time ago to when you open up a picture, the first thing I do is I set the black point and the white point, and then everything follows from that. And it's just a matter of, trying to dial into what is the latitude of the value that you've actually captured in the shot and not doing a whole bunch of work to try to artificially create things that you don't have in the information in front of you. And an easy check for that on the highlight for me is if I bring something down and my sky is just turning gray, well, I mean, I already know there's no information there, but that's going to change the path for the edits that follow.
You always have to think what is important in the picture, because fireworks are a light, and you know that if you go into a forest, then they have dark places.
Yeah.
So what you want to say with the picture? So I was in the school for photography as well, and with black and white, they told it was in the time of film. They told us. Measure the black in the camera and go 2 stops under it. Then you always have black. So that is the most important thing. And if
Mhm.
you don't want too much light, then you have to do something with the developing.
Yeah.
But the most important is go two steps under the black,
And
under the gray point.
if you want to get real nitpicky, particularly if you're doing landscape photography, have your camera on a tripod and see there's sun coming behind the mountain or something like that. Go ahead and make a shot exposing for the foreground and then make a shot exposing for the sky. And then you can sandwich those in post and you can merge them. As well as you can also focus that by focusing on the foreground and then focusing on the background. So there's lots of ways many ways to skin a cat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As
One
long
of
as you know
my
what you're doing.
Yeah, one of my favorite, like I can't count the number of times that some of my favorite shots have resulted from a mistake I made. So a shot I really like that I think it's somewhere up on Flickr. I'll have to go look, but I was at an amusement park, a carnival kind of thing here in Vancouver, and I took a shot of a Ferris wheel and completely overexposed it, like dramatically overexposed it. So the sky and everything was pure white, but the cars and the Ferris wheel had a really interesting kind of colorful feel to them, and so the overall vibe of the shot is really quite lovely. But it's a terrible shot if you look at it in terms of precision, but visually it's a shot I really like.
Well,
Yeah,
that can depend
sometimes
on
you learn a lot about your mistakes. Huh?
Yeah, you can do, yeah, like you hear, but here
Happiness.
the blown highlights, and blown highlights is like some, never ever have blown highlights. No, it depends on how you define blown highlights. Like I'm a big fan of Ansel Adams and Fred Archer's zone system. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah.
the zone system or not, where you have the brightest zone is pure white, and it's a lot of people will avoid that at all costs. And I always ends up, to me, it feels like that's what they're doing, but it ends up with a flat photo.
Yeah.
In my opinion, unless it's low key, there should be at least some area in there that's the brightest zone, and also some areas of the darkest zone. And then you slide one way or the other from that end, depending on. But you're talking about like a sky in the background, so that'd be kind of high key. So that's all going to be white, pure white.
Yeah.
Problem with that, But people will say, "Oh, the highlights are blown."
Yeah,
I don't think there's any real word for it to say, instead of saying it's blown, says these are a proper. You're using the zones. I like to say that you're using the grayscale effectively.
Yeah. Well, as I say, that particular shot was a result of a mistake. But
Yeah,
then you look at the result and go, oh, I take your point because I think that if you understand the latitude of what information you can actually capture, however, whether you're using a sensor or film, one of our members this year or this week, he posted something that I asked him about. It was Wolfman. The shot, the night shot with very low key with and it's underexposed, quite dramatically underexposed, but a lot of that is part of the quality of what makes the shot that he liked. And so again, having an appreciation of what are you trying to do and how would you achieve that, that works for some folks, and some people want to say, well, that's terribly underexposed and noisy, so I don't like it. But in the pixel peeping, I think there are ways to kind of gain a better sense of what you're doing, both at the time, like before well, I guess they're always pixels at the photo site when you're capturing either on film or on a sensor, through to what you do on the computer to the digital file through manipulation. If you're sensitive to what you're trying to manipulate or what you're trying to capture in the first place, I think you just have a few more choices at play in your image rather than luck or mistakes.
yeah, it's far more easy to make pictures now than 10 years ago because you have so much stops now. So
Yeah. Well, in the feedback loop, I mean, I have canisters of film that it takes me like weeks or years to develop. And whereas, I look at my shots digitally, probably within the day, more often than not.
how many stops we have now? 15 or something, or 14? I don't know.
14-ish, yeah. I mean, and then probably beyond that on some of the medium format.
20 years ago, they say, well, we can go to 8 maybe. So with film.
yeah. When you're talking about how many stops there are, and we use a medium format instead of like 35 millimeter size. I Back in the 70s, I was really tried to practice the zone system as much as I could, and I only used roll film. At the time, I was using a Nicormet EL, and pretty much Ansel Adams and people like that, they would shoot one piece of film that he would either over process or under process to push or pull the film. Then you would also do the same, and then you would check out. They use a spot meter to see where the
Yeah,
shadows are,
yeah, yeah.
highlights, and so forth, and you would adjust that kind of exposure and development accordingly. So that was one piece of film. So if you got like 36 individual items, you can't process 36 different individual scenes like that. But I bulk loaded film for like six frames per roll, so I could do that, and I was successful. But since this was 35 millimeter film, the results were very small. I
Mm,
could see, yeah, that did work, but it didn't really make that big of a difference.
No.
When you're using 8x10 sheet film, that's a whole nother ballgame.
yeah.
It was a good thing, good practice to learn. It was a lot of fun, but it was kind of a waste of time. And I still have that bulk loader somewhere. I've never used that bulk loader since.
Oh, but you learned a lot.
Yes. Okay, now we're pushing the time. We don't have a limit. Now, Jeff, you were talking about wanting to learn about what I do to straighten out lines,
Mhm.
right? If you
Yeah.
want
Do you want
to,
to just,
we can do that right now if you want.
why not? If, I mean, as I said, I've fairly recently started using some of the transformation tools, mostly in Lightroom, a little bit in Photoshop, and I've learned that there's a lot of power that one can gain from it. The other thing I've learned though is there are times when I've applied that with certain shots and it takes something away because sometimes distortion also adds I don't know, a certain energy or a certain kind of perspective
Right.
that matters to the shot. But then other times, the shot is much stronger if I can do those corrections. So yes, I would love to hone my skill and gain better attention to those details.
You take a lot of architectural pictures, or
It's I frequently do because I'm walking through city environments all the time and even in forests and such there are ways to like you can make a really good choice in terms of how you position the camera or a so-so choice and then you deal with that afterwards either with a bad picture that can be retrieved or a really striking picture because of how things are organized in terms of the perspective. So I do take a lot of shots down. Like Vancouver's got a very vibrant modern downtown, so lots of light, lots of glass, lots of reflections, and so having a little bit more precision in when I should be taking a good architectural shot would be useful to me.
and what is your problem? To get it straight, or
So yeah, I think what I'm doing sometimes is my focal plane is maybe a bit askew relative to the line, or I'm tilted up, tilted down, tilted one way or the other. So I think that some of this is just some of the corrections you can make to the geometry of the shot using the image itself. But I don't shoot with a tilt shift lens at all. And I often am shooting, I mean, I do have sometimes shooting with a really wide lens. So that introduces a lot more distortion if I'm a little bit off
the more
kilter.
wide, the more distortion. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
No, one
So,
thing,
Jant is gone, eh?
yes, I think he said he had a grandchild to take.
Grandchild, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the one thing, an advantage we have now, because I have in my old Nikon D70, it was like a 7 megapixel image. So if you try to make very many geometric corrections for that, you sort of get this smearing with the pixels
Mhm.
that you can notice. Now, once you get up to 20 megapixels or greater, you don't notice it. So you have a lot more freedom to make these adjustments.
Mhm.
Now, of course, if you have a view camera like Ansel Adams stuff, where they would have the tilt and swings and
That's better.
Yeah.
like that to get everything all straight. And you can do that somewhat with a tilt shift lens, but only got one of those and it's like a super wide angle macro.
Yeah.
Really much for
Well, and the other thing I noticed, and maybe this is still maybe a lack of skill, I'm going to think it's exactly that on my part. So I had this wonderful shot that is, let's say, scaffolding of with construction workers passing pipe up and down, and it was a really lucky and a nice shot. However, there were problems with it because it was like up like this, and so things were distorted. So when I corrected it, it actually looks really good. It's nice. The lines are nice and straight, but the man right at the top must be 8 feet tall
Yeah.
because it stretched him out. So, kind of figuring out how do you maybe have a bit more sophistication in making those adjustments so you don't create these monstrous distortions in some of the places.
I tell you what you could have done at that guy top. I'm just going to tell you this. I'll show you. I'm going to demo some stuff here in a minute. Just select the top just below his feet, and then stretch it down,
Oh, okay.
and then just chop off that top part.
Yeah.
That works great all the time.
Go back and make it bigger. Yeah, make the photo bigger. So yeah,
Yeah.
and then you have more room. Yeah.
I will revisit this one because I think it bears more play.
Yeah.
But I was thinking while you were telling this, Teddy, maybe when we have problems with photographs, we can put it on the agenda for next week. So, for
Yeah.
example, when I don't know how to solve a problem, then we can talk about it next week.
Well, if you get even if you get one little inkling of an idea from somebody, I mean, if the rest of the stuff they say is total baloney, one thing could make all the difference in the world with your photography.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
when you team that up with like the 100 other little things that happen to you, that's how you become better.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you.
And when you're talking about geometry, geometrical elements in an image, you need to think about where your sensor is, where what they used to call the film plane is. Like generally, if you're looking up at a building, you're going to have converging verticals,
Yeah.
not avoidable. But if you try to get your sensor plane parallel to the wall you're photographing as much as you can, and you don't have to get it exact, but as much as you can, that makes it a whole lot easier to correct it. If you get a twist this way or that, and especially if you got a wide angle lens, you really get this horrible helical twist that you cannot correct
Yeah.
because you
But
have all the
sometimes you
jaw.
can solve your problem to go at the opposite of the street and go up.
Yeah.
Yeah, to
So
get higher
yeah,
elevation. Yeah.
yeah.
I put the link to that picture in just so you can see
Oh
the
yeah.
guy at the top. Just we should it in the weekly group have a mechanics forum for people can post a picture where they're having trouble. I mean,
Oh
I've
yeah.
always appreciated when people have offered edits and offered suggestions. So that's been a nice thing that people have contributed, and it's always been nice to have that feedback. But you see the guy on the top is probably
Yeah.
twice as tall as everyone else.
Yeah. His legs are like, what, half the size of his torso.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean. You could probably scrunch that. Just select. You don't have to select the entire image. You probably could because it is it gradually gets a little bit worse halfway up. So
Yeah.
you could probably just scrunch that up by pulling it down. But you're right. That's a great image with the pull, the lines are great here. And you don't have a blown out sky.
No, and everything else is working quite well, but this is quite a crop in from what it was. But to me, this was a nice illustration of how
Yeah.
you have to pay attention when you're doing geometric adjustments to the lines
Yep.
because some places in the image are going to really be distorted, and the proportional relationship, like you'll have bricks that are suddenly twice the size of other ones, and if they're in too close proximity, it's going to really leap out at people.
It's okay if the bricks are larger because they're closer,
Hmm.
but if they're larger because they're farther away, that's
Yeah.
all because you need perspective. The perspective works in your, and yeah, this would be particularly difficult because you do have so many lines in the different angles, but you did a good job correcting this though.
It was a fun one to play with, but it kind of brought to my attention that there are a lot of things at play when you're adjusting, not the least of like when you have building elements, they're a bit more, well, they're not so much abstract, but people really show distortions, like when they're at the edge of a wide angle or such. So if someone's face is like suddenly wide and such, you'll really notice that more so than if a tree is a little bit bloated or some such thing.
Yeah, I'm going to pop this. I'm going to share the screen here and hopefully get this. I'm kind of a hard time finding my images are getting lost here. There's no is vertical pipe brigade is where is it? Oh, there we go. It's hiding behind that. That one. Can you see your photo there?
Not yet.
Okay. So that's what I was telling you. You have all these various angle pieces. There are at least the two significant ones at the top and midway down. That could have been a horrible twist, but it's not. It's a very natural looking angle. And you do have some convergence coming from like the plywood at the top. There are convergences there that don't quite match, but nobody's going to notice that because it's darker.
I cannot see it yet.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, here we go. Can you see it now?
Well, yeah.
Okay. That's the one. I can, like Jeff pointed out, he's noticed his legs are so much shorter than his torso.
I think you have done a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like the guy at the bottom with rubbernecking up, and the guy at the top is rubbernecking up too. Like, what's he looking at? So you have this flow of going straight up, right off out to the top of wherever you're building something up.
Yeah. Maybe when there was a little bit more at the upper side, it would be a bit better.
But I'm going to keep my screen share. I'm going to see if I can find, because I use Adobe Bridge. I don't use Lightroom. I don't really understand Lightroom. Can you see a screen that has all these weird architectural images here?
Not yet.
Okay, that's the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. I mean, these are architectural details of that particular building. It's an I.M. Pei building. I.M. Pei is the same architect who did the Louvre Pyramid, um, the what was it, Washington, D.C., the main art museum, the modern art museum. He's a very prominent architect. And he was also, this movie is featured in the movie Sleeper with Woody Allen. And my wife, she's an affiliated scientist here. And she was, sometimes I would drop her off at the place here where she would go in, and there was a driveway. Where I dropped her off was the same place where Woody Allen was driving a steamroller when he rolled over the leader's nose. If that means anything to the Sleeper movie. So anyway, here is some ways we can think about, and I'm going to use this example. And this, I'm popping this.
We don't have that screen up yet. We're still on the my image.
Okay, let me see. Share. Come on, you. Go back to the Zoom screen. We're still learning about this stuff. I lost my Zoom screen.
You're still here.
Okay, you're seeing, okay, so come on, Zoom.
So when you bring up the sharing screen, you should be able to choose between which of your windows you want to share.
That's what I'm trying to do because my Zoom, is it covered up with this window? No. Oh, I think I see what's going on here. I'm going to stop sharing.
Stop and start again.
There we go. Now I'm going to click the share, and I'm going to pick up. I'm going to bring this one over and my bridge. There we go. Now I'm going to share.
There we go. Wow.
This is Adobe Bridge. That's the
Okay.
National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. It's the I.M. Pei building I was talking about. That was also featured in the movie Sleeper. So I'm going to use as an example this photograph, the 0123-132, and you should be able to see the, do you see a camera, Adobe Camera Raw, where you see the entire image?
I
No.
still just see Photoshop is your top.
Okay, I might need to resume and share again.
You only see on the left background.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and go back to the sharing again. Go back to Zoom. Come on. Where's my Zoom meeting? Here we go. Share. Now, do you see
There we are.
Yes, camera raw.
the camera raw? Now, there is a, I'm going to go ahead and make the light up a little bit. Now, here's what I'll often do too. I'll pull the shadows all the way out and open up and the highlights all the way back just to explore these things. See what kind of details are wherever, you know. I'm going to boost the whites a little bit and exposure up. Because that's actual pretty close to the color of the building itself. I was just in a big rush here, and then I'm going to put it back in Photoshop, which, come on, we lost it. Back to bridge. Are you still seeing it?
No.
Rats. Okay. I'm going to practice this stuff with my son so we don't have to do this.
Oh, we have time.
Share. I'm going to go back to, here we go, Adobe Camera Raw. Can you see it now, Adobe Camera Raw?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you see the little tools on the right side, there is a little square with the two arrows pointing around each other. Can you see that?
The crop tool.
Yes. So you click that, and there's an A. And what I'll often do just right off the bat, I'll just click that. And there's a little bit of manipulation there that has happened, but not much. So there's not, sometimes that will just fix it. By just clicking that A, all your geometry is fixed. That's like 1/4 of the time. So the rest of it, and here I'm going to click, if I can get, I'm going to go ahead and click this to open in Photoshop. I don't even have my, here we go, open in Photoshop. I'm probably going to have to reshare for Photoshop.
Yeah.
Okay, still see it?
Yes.
Okay. Now what I will do, and I'm not saying this is the best way to do this, I'm just showing what you can do with the lines. I will take the tool here on the left. Again, you have the crop tool. Bring the crop tool right about something like that. Whatever it looks right for you. There it's cropped. Then I will go to the edit, transform, distort. And I'll just take that piece over here, stretch it out this way, stretch it out that way, get that straight, and then just keep doing this back and forth. You could also do the perspective tool as well, but this I think is a little more fine, a little bit more of a fine tuning. And as you get closer and closer to those being straight, and this is kind of an extreme situation here, so I'm doing a little bit more than I normally would. Let's just call that close enough. Then just take the, and you can see what's done with the angles. So there we've got those two verticals are straight. Of course, now we've got all this empty space. Now, sometimes you can actually, I'm going to use the edit tool or the, with the object selection tool, the magic wand tool to select the area. And I'm going to take the image, oh, I'm sorry, select, modify, expand. And there's the expand selection that's over near the screen. So I'm going to say 30 pixels. And then I'm just going to do fill and see what happens. Just thinking about it. Here it comes. Now, as you can see, this is imperfect. But you can see, well, it's did a reasonable job with straightening that stuff out. I don't think this is the ideal image to get it as, I think is actually better with the convergences and that, but you can see how I was able to straighten out those horizontals. And if you get out really close, and you can see some of the lines where the fill took place. And you don't always want to use that fill. You would never want to use that much fill. But all the sides are parallel. Whatever noise is there is still pretty even. It's not twisted. But that's how I will often straighten out my images.
Right.
So any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's pretty amazing. I was just about to say that I've been fairly shy or a bit constrained in terms of using generative fill. though I'm starting to explore it a little bit when it actually makes a difference. And as you said, you used more here than you typically would. But it is really fascinating the way in which, this actually works really quite well. The way I've been doing or approaching this through Lightroom is I use a combination of the some automated geometry correction, but then I'll sometimes use the guided version where, in this image I would have picked that line, the two lines that you picked, drawing a vertice down each of them, and then found the horizontal line, and that does a similar job in terms of creating that view that's slightly cut where there's no information. But then I usually crop into where there's no information. So that I think they're similar results at the end. But this one is quite interesting in terms of like in Photoshop having all that additional way to jump over the gap that's created and where there's no information.
Yeah, and I think there's a tool off the top that I never use, and I'm not sure where it's at, but there's a place at the top of the Photoshop window where you can draw a line to,
Mhm.
to make that
Right.
line which
Great.
one to use. I never
Yeah,
use that. It's not that it's not a good tool, I just don't use it. But yeah, as you can see,
when you use straighten, you can see when you have the crop tool, and then it's updating, I think, straighten.
yeah, and you can see with the generative fill, you can see little smears that wouldn't be hard to touch out. And I think most people would never notice that.
No.
Although I don't think this is an improvement in this photograph.
Well, no, I kind of like the converging one in some respects, but I mean,
Yeah,
it is because as I said earlier, there are times when making everything rectilinear
right,
pulls energy out of the picture. It kind of creates an artificial perspective rather than a corrected perspective. And I
right.
think figuring out that balance is important.
Desktop. I'm gonna try doing it just to sharing a desktop instead. So if we go back to bridge, can you see my bridge screen?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, here you can see a lot of the other shots I took here. Yeah, usually when you're with architecture, you're looking at buildings like this one where it's like pyramid-like,
Yep.
which that doesn't mean you need to straighten that out. That can be effective.
Yep. But straightening the lines and maybe playing a bit with the vertical can actually make a huge difference. Like centering it or, throwing it off center if that's your vision for it. Oh, I
Yeah,
love these shadows. The third one on the bottom is quite nice.
yeah, the shadow. Oh yeah, I try to get there early in the morning and do that stuff. And like for example, yeah, there's this keyhole structure that I particularly like.
Yeah, you've shared a few, or at least one of these before.
Yeah, my goal here is when I go back there, I want to try to set a tripod up and have my wife take a picture of me sitting on those steps. Then of course you can see the angle of the sun here with my shadow.
So,
And
yeah, and you were saying earlier about just how much more power or I suppose ability we have to make these corrections now. And it's absolutely right. I mean, how would this kind of geometry create you couldn't have done it in post quite the same way. You'd have to really accommodate this in the camera with tilt and shift alignments.
oh yeah,
Or
without
is there a darkroom technique that would do a version of what you just showed us?
yes, you could actually there are ways in the darkroom, and I've experimented with this, but you don't have a whole lot of play. You can tilt your easel,
Yeah.
make
Okay.
but you're enlarging just like depth of field in your
In
camera.
opposite way, yeah.
Yeah, you do a tight aperture with your
Yeah.
enlarger lens, and
Boy, does that sound fiddly.
yes, it is, and it's just very marginal what you can do. You can adjust it a little bit, but not a whole lot.
No.
Now these are really nice shots. What is the lens you're using for this?
This one I'm using a 24 to 120. That's my go-to lens. I don't normally use wide angles anymore. I got a great wide angle, but generally when I've went to wide angles, I'll do stitch panoramas, for example. So, and this is probably shot at 24 millimeters, which is a wide angle, but
Yep.
I got a 10 to a 14 to 24 Nikkor. That's a great lens. But I find myself not, and that mostly that was for landscape photography. And we're
Well, 14 on architecture is like you just have to be absolutely straight or else you've got wild distortion.
yes. Oh yeah, and it's hard. And you can also do warp to get some of that stuff taken care of, but that's kind of fussy.
Yeah, but that's not easy, I've seen.
Yeah,
Because mostly when you do something in one side, then the other side has too much effect there.
yeah. And here is an example of this one. This wasn't successful, but here's a panorama that didn't turn out at all. The result of this panorama is this. But whoopee! I don't know what. Take this shot. I even go to the trouble of stitching it. Um,
But the yellow worked good.
but this one works a little bit better. Once it gets opened here. So that's a little bit better, but still it's no cigar, but you can see there's some uninteresting geometrical stuff going on there.
Yeah.
And this is like here's six, and that's handheld. I didn't put this on a tripod or anything. So with just a little bit of practice, you can do stitch panoramas very well.
Yep.
I mean, I've even handheld panoramas on a rolling ship deck,
Wow.
and generally they turn out fine. Photoshop is very good at doing this stuff. But any other questions about that, or
No. I mean, I don't usually use Bridge. I guess I mean I have access to the tools. I can bring things out of Lightroom into Photoshop and then pull up the camera raw tools through
Yeah.
Photoshop. So I've been doing things that way, but I haven't tried the specific way that you did that before. With that image that you initially corrected for me, then you showed me the example, that Dominion building one from a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
The thing I was thinking there is that for what I was trying to do in that image, what I would probably do is mask out the centerpiece there that you corrected, but still I wanted those edges of those two other buildings. So I would just mask it, do the corrections on the building in the background, and then maybe bring it a bit larger and drop it back in, because then I would still have the framing of those two buildings, which was part of the goal. So like the other bit of editing that becomes interesting here, which I haven't done so much of, is if you actually start compositing corrected parts of an image together, you can do, quite a bit more. Whether or not all images are worth that effort, it depends, but it's kind of fun to know you have that ability if you want to dig into it.
yeah, they're and it's also if you're doing architecture, if you have your camera on a tripod, focus stacking isn't a bad idea. At least to look into that, because oftentimes you get a really cool shot, but then you realize so much of it's out of focus, even though maybe the top of the building is in focus. The half of the rest of the photo is out of focus, which might be okay. That might be a good way to draw the viewer's eye toward the top of the building. But oftentimes you want the whole length of the building to be in focus.
Yeah.
Something like this shot here. I didn't. That would be easy to correct,
hmm
and I think that would improve this. Even if it was improved, I don't think that'd be a great of a photo. And most, 90% of the photos I take are not any good.
That's still pretty good.
Yeah, I don't think I'm being generous with myself in that case.
1 out of 10.
Yeah, that's if I'm lucky, and then if you do photography by attrition, where you go rapid fire, you're probably going to get 1 out of 4,000.
In the street, I have mostly 1 out of 100.
Yeah.
No, these are really quite striking. I like the fox.
Yeah, that Smile. This is Guy Smile. This is a graffiti artist. Now, here's another thing we were talking about. We've talked about OPA, other people's art. Which generally, I try not to put other people's art into my images for critical review, at least unless it's just very small pieces of it.
How do you
Because
call it? OPA?
OPA is other people's art.
Okay, yeah.
Like, for instance, if I were to take a picture of the Mona Lisa full frame and I got a real shot of it, but that's all it is. It's a reproduction of the Mona Lisa. Should I put that? Should I get that for critical review? That or is that somebody else's art? You know?
Yeah, but did they say about the architecture as well?
Yeah, but architecture, and I have some theories on that. There's a difference between two-dimensional art and three-dimensional art.
Mhm.
There's also a difference between sculpture and architecture. Because architecture is in a three-dimensional area, and you have so many different ways you can look at it. Where you have, I mean, the only way you're really going to reproduce a piece of architecture or sculpture is to reproduce the sculpture in three dimensions. So it's not like you're really able to copy it. So it's more it's more like there's a lot of leeway there.
Mhm.
I mean, I've liked the way it's been discussed a little bit in terms of like in the image here, I see a contribution that you're making through the framing, what you've included, how you've presented. If you had just zoomed up close on the fox, it's just presenting someone else's work. So I think the context matters a fair bit. There's some subjective presence of the photographer. We see a lot of shots where people are using that, the visual presence of the cat or the effaced graffiti there to capture an atmosphere of a building, of an alley, of a neighborhood. And I think that's all legitimate. I don't necessarily know that it's best to put that forward of a critique of your own image, but at the same time, I think it depends because there are some really clever and creative ways in which people have repositioned that visual component as part of the image. So it's a judgment call.
Yeah, according to copyright law and stuff like that, it's what they call transformative,
Mm.
where the artist, the photographer, has applied something unique to it, something new about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm good with that. But you know what? I'm up for discussion. I just think I would not recommend people submit something for critical review that contains a lot of
Yeah,
artistry, especially two-dimensional artistry.
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, yeah.
And like here's our graffiti. You can see I've made, and that's all from the same. Yeah, this is the same image here, and this is what I've done with it. You can see I'm looking down a sidewalk with a brick wall. So I corrected this to sort of make, three quadrants here. But that's
You've got
somebody
some
else's art.
graffiti in your neighborhood.
Yeah, well, that's in Boulder, Colorado. So
Oh, okay.
same town where the National Center for Atmospheric Research is. We also have some pretty good here in Bloomington. It's a college town too. So but this is like more. This is more typical of what, and this is like a focus stack here,
Wow.
and how this ends up. But again, what's the narrative here? I don't know. Beautiful
The
flowers.
flower.
Okay.
You cannot say the background.
And you flipped it, with that upside down, with it running that way, it's visually interesting. So that's
Well,
enough.
it's typical for these dahlias to be grouped down, kind of
Yeah.
get really heavy. But even though, yeah, in this case it wasn't. And that 105 millimeter macro is like, it's got great background. That's all there is to it. Now, if I were to shoot that same photo, I think I shot this at f5.6. With a focus stack, you can easily get away with that. If I shot this at f11 or f16, the background details would be much more pronounced. Like that's in this. It was taken probably about 50 feet from where I'm sitting right now, but you would have clearly been able to see the back doors of our house.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't want that in this photo.
You could have managed this in with editing, maybe. Yeah.
You could, but you don't. It's better. I think it's much better to do it in camera.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's true.
Optical distortion is often quite distinctive. I love distortion from lenses, so I'm actually wanting it. And the separation is a piece of it, but the other characteristics that are sometimes introduced through just the laws of physics and flaws in glass can also be very artistically or aesthetically pleasing to me.
Yes, it can be if you're and that's something else too with AI. That would never work with AI. you won't get these surprises. Like you were talking about the accident with was it a Ferris wheel or
Yeah.
that wouldn't happen. The AI wouldn't go, oh, I'm surprised. But this would be an example of focus stacking. But I thought this focus stack did a really good job, but I'm not happy with it at all. It's just like there are too many artifacts around, like the feet, the leg here. There are all kinds of weird artifacts you can encounter.
The
And
details are really something.
the details are good, but overall, you can see a halo around it, and then there's hot spots. You can see these streaks here. Each one of those streaks is comprised of a series of dots that are like the hot spot moving out because as you get into the image itself, you notice with the focus stack,
Oh, right.
it starts to get bigger and bigger. And of course, this you can actually see the antenna moving. I don't know how quick your screen is refreshing or not, but
Yeah, I can see it move.
so the Helicon Focus is trying to reconcile that, which it does a good job, but still, to me, it's not suitable.
And how much photos are this?
What's that now?
How much photos you have here?
224.
Wow.
Now with the macro, you can do that. You're not going to get 224 in a landscape. Landscape, you're going to get maybe 7 or 11. But when you get up really close, your lens, I mean, now, of course, this is all automatic. My camera is set up just to do it. And I can make a very fine progression, or I can make a wide progression. I always choose the finest. So you can easily shoot, gosh, especially if you get like a leaf, where the leaf is close to the front of your lens and it's like 2 inches farther from your lens, you can get like 600 images in order to get them all in focus. Not that you really want to do that, but it would be possible to do that. But so, okay.
Nice, sharp.
Yeah, it's crazy. No, I've got a focus rail. I mean, I haven't really tried stacking at all yet, other than with some astrophotography. I did
Oh, yeah.
some shots of the sun when it was eclipsed in 2017 and stacked a few hundred images, and that worked out really well. But I haven't brought it to bugs or flowers.
Yeah, the astrophotography, that's a very interesting field for focus stacking.
Yeah. And they call it integration when you
Yeah.
are integrating images across multiple hours, multiple exposures.
Trying to find one of my here. Yeah, here I got 1,173 images of bees.
Wow.
And of all these bee shots, I'm going to make it till type, I did as a successful image. Wait a minute. 2 images. They're not all bees or other bugs. Out of all those images, I've only done. No, wait a minute. That's not even one that's successful. That's just a folder with a sweat bee. Anyway, none of these were really suitable. Now I could probably go back through these and find one. Oh yeah, this one's going to be okay. But these are ones that's like definitely I would hit the delete key on that one. But these are not any good. And what I do is I just hold down the shutter 20 frames a second, and I've got a flash at 128th power so we can keep up with it. I just keep going until I get a good shot. And if you get in the afternoon, summer afternoon, maybe, yeah, that one's not bad, but still it's not. The
But
ton
you
of
do that,
focus.
you do that with photo stacking as well?
No, that's
Maybe?
not focus stacking. This is just
Okay.
shooting at f16.
Okay.
I'm thinking I'd be happy with about a half a dozen or dozens of those shots. Those are really nice. But I'm shooting handheld with without a tripod, without a flash. So getting this level of detail would be a good shot.
What's the secret to the detail on something like this is the fact that a lot of people will assume if you're shooting at 250th of a second or so, you're going to get it frozen,
Mhm.
nice sharp frozen image. When you have a macro and you have these tiny little bugs, that's amplified. That motion is amplified because it doesn't take much motion to make that fuzzy. Now, what I'll use to remedy that is use a handheld flash And a full power, I think a handheld flash is something like 1500th of a second or something like that, which is pretty fast. About 128th power, you're talking about 1/64,000th of a second.
Hmm.
So you're really actually freezing the image.
Right.
And then, of course, you had 128th power. That's not much juice.
And the other photo you showed us, the first one, that was with stacking. But there was a dead animal, I think, or not?
Yeah, none of these folders are what I consider to be successful at all. I might be able to mine this and find one more out of here or something like that. But these are all rejects. And this is my June folder, and I'm in the wintertime, I go through all my photos and call out the bad ones. I need to save up some disk space. And the ones that the summertime photos I posted here the past week, those are from that process. And I don't really like that dark of a background either.
Hmm.
So that must have been later in the afternoon or a cloudy day or something. My ideal situation is if you have some sunlight coming in too.
Right. Give you some hue behind.
Yeah. And these Verbena bonarensis, these things are like 6 feet tall, these flowers. So you don't have to bend over. You don't have to be on your knees. You can just stand there and fire away. And I'm 72 years old, so the less I have to be on my knees, the better. But anyway, we're just throwing up another thing. I think we're pushing the 2 hour line. We probably ought to call it quits at that.
Yeah.
So do you guys have anything else to say about that, or?
No, just I appreciate your sharing some of your techniques, both in terms of the geometry and with the stacking. I mean, I've looked at the results of some of your macro shots and been very impressed. I'll figure out some ways to introduce some aspects of this in terms of some future shots, but with the architecture stuff, I'm already playing with that.
Yeah, and if you want to touch base with me, we can share this one-on-one. If you have something you're having trouble with, I'd be happy to work with that. And if you learn some new stuff on your own, let me know and show me what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because I'm not.
Your planning is to do next week another time?
Yes, I am. I want to try to do another one, a weekday one. I'm talking about before mid-March, having one for weekday as well. But I'm going to shoot for another noon for next Sunday.
Okay. Now let's think about it, and then thank you very much for showing us what you have done.
Yeah, appreciated the conversation today.
That's great.
Thank you very much for talking to you. It was very nice.
I got faces on those pictures now. That makes a difference.
Yeah, that's true.
All right.
It's about the pictures.
All right.
Yes.
Enjoy the rest of the weekend, everyone.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Now I can't find the leave button.
See you next Sunday.
Bye.